and they voted to leave. Unbelievable. Really, just for the Germans, unbelievable. But I'd have to be honest, I think the Europeans thought it was such a clear case, they didn't even educate your average voter in the UK how important this trade relationship was, let alone everything else. The education system is in complete array at the moment as far as where a student, lots of students want to study in the UK, and they're now all wondering whether they'll be able to in the future. And for the UK, that's really going to be a big worry. Straight, of course, German organisations, straight after the result, surveys went out. The German chambers surveyed their 3.7 million companies. Within 3 days, 5,600 had responded. And these are the results of those 5,600. I haven't actually had the final results of the rest of it. But I thought it was fundamentally interesting to look at the German perspective straight after the results came out. So German companies believe that basically everything will pretty much stay the same for the next 2 years, which is what it'll take, well, from March next year, theoretically, until the UK is no longer part of the EU, if that's what ends up actually happening. However, they felt quite clearly that that would change afterwards, once that UK was no longer part of the EU, that there would be fewer exports to the UK. So for the EU countries, of course, this is a bit of a thinking thing, okay, where are we going to export those products to in the future? More importantly, of course, is the whole question of workforce. My colleagues told me that they've got 1,300 German subsidiaries in the UK, all of them employing on average over 5,000 people. Add that up, that's quite a lot of people. So critical is, of course, what's going to happen to those operations in the future. There's been a lot in the paper about Deutsche Bank. Deutsche Bank is not in a good way at the moment, but I can't imagine that they will go under. In fact, German businesses actually saying if need be, they will prop up Deutsche Bank. Deutsche Bank employs 12,000 people in London. That's just one company. So at the moment, as per the surveyed results, most German companies believe that their workforces will remain the same for the next 2 years. However, after that, they obviously won't be expanding their workforce. They actually only 26% thought they would actually reduce it. So this was actually quite an interesting result. Bear in mind, this was a couple of months ago. The press in the meantime and the discussions in the German companies since this thing has dragged on is changing. And I think they'll be doing another survey probably in March next year when theoretically Article 50 will be enacted. I think the Germans are quite frustrated that it's taken the English so long to just get the process rolling. And they want to take a much harder line now because the UK is dragging the chain. They can't understand, if you decide to have a referendum and that's the result, well, bloody get on with it, right? So it will be interesting times. The chart that was put out at the start of the year, this is expected growth of exports between Germany and the UK. The chart at the start of the year had plus 5%. This is the new revised growth expectations that Germany has to the UK. And it's just dramatically dropped. They've just basically done an about turn. I think probably from the stuff that I've been reading, the area that will be most affected though is the financial sector. Obviously London itself is the mecca of every financial institute you can imagine, and it was really interesting because while all this was going on before the referendum, there was a discussion between the German DAX and the London Stock Exchange about merging. And we all thought, oh, this is doomed. But really interestingly, just after the results came out, they actually formally agreed to go through with the merger. So that's actually seen as a really positive thing, that even though the UK is pretty likely to leave the EU, Germany and London, the two stock exchanges, are actually partnering up. And the office, or the headquarters, will be in London, not in Frankfurt, which was the other surprise. So it's early days. Who knows? I've got this on film now and I'm going to regret it next year when everything is different. But I mentioned the schooling. I think that's going to be also a crucial area, because the number of young Europeans who study at UK universities is extremely high. It may actually be quite interesting for New Zealand, and I do see that there will be some stuff flowing out of this that will be good for New Zealand. Our office has been, I wouldn't say inundated, but has certainly noticed an increase in inquiries from New Zealand companies wanting to know how to set up business in Germany. Whereas previously, I could just not convince any company, you know, if a New Zealand company had a mate in the UK, they would always use that mate and they would always set up in the UK, and that would be their operations for the EU. And it always confused me. I just never could understand why a company would do that when strategically it would be far more logical to be sitting in the centre of the EU rather than in an island with a whole bit of water in between and a different currency. Never could understand it. So I think it is going to change. If it's New Zealand, it'll be Australia, it'll be a whole lot of countries that will now be looking at, okay, we're not going to have our operation headquarters in the UK, we need to actually have a look at the EU. And I estimate probably the Netherlands will benefit the most from it, and Germany probably second. So that's my take on it. And I'll probably regret it next year, but there we are. We'll have another talk about this in March.